Welcome back. All right, this time our question is, why does God allow suffering? Now, it's a little bit kind of a continuation from our last question, which was, why does God allow evil? They're kind of connected, and suffering is such a broad topic that we might need multiple sessions to answer. So let's start with, in the Old Testament, in the Bible, the first people, Adam and Eve, whoever you want to call them, they actually sinned. They represent all of us who sin. And when we look at who God is and everything good that He offers us and tells us we should do in order to help ourselves, we just don't always do it. We don't always follow what God asks us to do. And so we go off and do what we want to do. A lot of times we know it's wrong, we do it anyway, and then later we realize, oh, that didn't help me at all, that hurt me. And so we realize that God was right. We should have listened to Him in the first place. But there's this sin in us that keeps us turning away from Him. Because of free will, God allowed that to happen. Like Adam and Eve fell from original sin, and we all suffer. Even without them, we would have probably done the same thing, just in different ways, turning away from God. So the moment we all commit our own personal sin, we're all guilty as well. But God doesn't just allow that to happen and let it go. That could have been the end of the story. The devil was there, he tempted Adam and Eve, and we all fell. And so he could have just sent all human race with the devil away from Him for eternity. That's what we call hell, or Gehenna, a permanent place away from God. He could have sent everyone away from Him forever just for one sin, because heaven is perfect and even one sin can't be in heaven with God. So that could have been the end of the story, but He didn't do that. He said, okay, there's going to be an ongoing battle between good and evil, between humans and the devil. It's going to be an ongoing battle, basically. So that's the good news, is the story wasn't over, and there's going to be an ongoing battle. Now, part of that is that suffering results. Anytime there's sin and evil, it causes some kind of suffering. And God is aware of that. And He's also, while people are sinning, God has a plan. And we don't always see God's plan right away, because He might start out with a little seed. But when God creates a plan, it keeps going and growing and growing and growing, and no one can really stop it, which is good. So while Adam and Eve sinned, God was there creating a plan a little bit at a time. It's called covenant, if you ever look in covenants. And over time, the covenant grew larger and larger throughout the Old Testament. And so God was holding His promise to His people that He would help them. What happened is we have evil, but what does God ultimately do is that He ultimately comes in the form of a person, in Jesus, and Jesus comes, lives as us. He's tempted just like anybody else, but He doesn't commit to sin. And He actually suffers. So He feels what it's like to suffer, just like we all suffer in this world. We all have some cross. No one has it all perfectly easy, some worse than others, but everyone has some kind of cross and some kind of suffering. And God knows that, and Jesus felt the suffering. He was a person. He felt it. Went through life. He was mocked by soldiers, had a crown of thorns. He was nailed to a cross. He was abandoned by a lot of people, and ultimately died on the cross. And the good news is He rose from the dead 3 days later. But it shows you that God can take suffering and create something out of it that we're not even aware of. So if there was never any suffering whatsoever, we might not even know that there was a Savior, Jesus. So he allowed the suffering for a while so that he could send Jesus, and now we see God's love in a whole new and different way that we were not aware of before. So it's ironic that we think of suffering usually only in a negative way, but here's a positive way. We actually see how God can sacrifice and come to us in another way, another loving way, and ultimately what he wants to do is to bridge that gap where we turned away to sin, turned away from him. That's what we're talking about, sin and evil. He wants to repair that, because what we did, we can't fix that by ourselves. Even one sin would keep us out of heaven. So God, through his own initiative, comes into the world, and he's building a bridge to us. And that's Jesus building the bridge to us. And all we have to do is, wherever we are, we just have to stop, say we're sorry, turn around, face God, and come towards him. And he has built that bridge for us to come back. So that's one way in which suffering has a good purpose to it. That if we endure the suffering, get through it, turn around and ask God for help, that can be a beneficial thing, because now we've faced evil, we've faced sin, we've gotten through it, we've gotten stronger, our relationship with God is better, it's more connected, more personal, and now the next time something happens, we're able to be a little bit stronger to face it. And so, not always, but so there's usually a cycle of sin and coming back, but over time, we want to grow stronger in our trust in God. And one way we can trust is by going through sufferings, seeing the suffering that he went through in Jesus, and then come back to him. So that's just one type of suffering that has a beneficial purpose to it, in that instead of us being cast away forever, God has now come to us, repaired it, and we can actually be with him again. So when we look at suffering in other ways, we're going to look at it in terms of how does that help our relationship with God and other people. So I hope that helps you with that question for now. There's a lot more to it, which we might continue in our next session.